Hey everybody, how's it going? Michael Mosley here, aka ZaphMod. I'm here at XPO Gamefest right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I'm joined today by Bill, who is working on a game that you might have heard of called Perception.
Indeed.
It's out now on PC, Xbox One, and PS4, and it is now coming to the Switch, which is a big deal because the game itself, despite actually, we're going to let you talk about it.
Sure.
Because I want to talk about the game itself because graphically, it's unique. It has this unique minimalism look to it,
Yep.
but at the same time, the level design itself is pretty complex.
Sure.
So, can you talk a little bit about Perception and the way it came about?
Sure. So, the game, it's interesting that you said minimalism because that was one of my goals. Coming from the BioShock series, I worked on that for, I don't know, eight years or whatever. And I'm very proud of that, but I really wanted to take something that was a lot more intimate and a lot more focused and in a lot of ways minimalist. And so, yeah, the world of Perception is much more about the composition and the experience of trying to capture what it's like to use echolocation, right? And that allowed us the opportunity to show the world from a different perspective, and that was very interesting to me. I've always liked horror, and even though I'm a little leery of saying horror, we call it a thriller, because the presentation is much more like a Stanley Kubrick. Like The Shining for me was a huge inspiration. Okay. And so we created this world that called Echo Bluff, where you're exploring this mansion, and you see through sound, but there's something in the house that's listening for you, a thing called the presence. So if you create too much noise, it'll come and find you. And you're trying to piece together the history of this house, and as you're doing that, you end up jumping back in time, and the house will change, and you'll meet new characters, all while trying to avoid the presence. So.
All right. So, sound obviously plays a big part of Perception. How did you get the game to work the way you want? Because you had to build the world, of course, and then you had to put it to where the player themselves technically can't see it unless they're making sound.
Absolutely.
How did that come about? How did using sound as a core gameplay mechanic come about?
So the initial idea for playing as a blind person and using sound as a way of navigating, that actually came about when I was in grad school. Shortly after my time at Irrational, I was in a class. It was a prototyping class, and the professor, as we're leaving class one night, he said, like, by the time you all leave class tonight, by the time you get to your car, you're going to think of the next brilliant idea, right? And I'm like, it's such a silly thing, but I love that kind of challenge. So I'm walking to my car, and it's a cold October night, right? And I can see my breath in the air, and I feel like there's ice on the ground. I don't know if there is for sure, but it's really dark out, and one of the lights in the parking lot is out. And sort of tiptoeing into my car, and there's pine needles, like it feels like it's covering the ice. So I'm like being very careful, and I'm thinking about, okay, horror games. If I were to make a horror game, and I'm thinking about, like, information is the enemy of horror, right? So you always want to, like, horror games are always really dark. So it occurred to me as I'm walking very carefully, I'm like, what if you played a horror game and you couldn't see at all if you were blind? And so the idea hit me, and I called my wife, who's the game's writer and producer, and I'm like, what if you were playing a horror game where you were blind? She's like, oh, that sounds awesome. And so we immediately started researching echolocation, and I was lucky enough to interview a number of echolocators and talk to a lot of blind people. And just like as we immersed ourselves in the world and the technology that's available to blind people, and we sort of were inspired, obviously, quite a bit by it. And we started it became one of those things where, like, we need to make this happen, right? And as we started to prototype, we realized how well it worked for exploration and for creating a spooky environment and all this sort of thing. We just fell in love with it, So we just kind of kept moving ahead with it and had a great time.
All right. So the character you play obviously has a connection with the mansion, the house within the story. You said that there is a presence within the house. As you go through the story and you meet new characters and you start to find out more about your character's backstory and this house, will the presence that haunts you, is it something that be more philosophical, or is it more like simply for the game to keep the game tense and the thriller genre?
Sure. So it's a good question, and I'm always leery of spoilers, but I will say it's a little of both.
Okay.
The seed of the idea of the story, we say in the very beginning, we say inspired by true events, and part of that is the local history of the New England area where I grew up, and then also it's also a little bit of my personal family history going back generations. And as I said, the game takes place over hundreds of years, so there's little touchstones throughout that touch on my personal family history and, again, the history of the area. And so the presence in a lot of ways, and it's really exciting to me to watch the way some people have really honed in on what the presence means and what the themes of the game and how they all tie together, because it takes place over 4 different chapters over hundreds of different years. And so the presence does represent a number of different things that I won't spoil right here, and that it all ties back into the core theme that when you reveal why you're being called to as Cassie, why the house is calling to you. It's sort of like, I was always inspired by Silent Hill 2. That was one of my favorite games of all time. And the same way that Silent Hill calls out to people to say, like, you need to come here. That's kind of what the house does, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why Cassie is being pulled here, and she's being tormented for months and months, these nightmares, and she needs to get to the bottom of that. And so she has a little something to prove as well, because she's been told no her entire life. As a blind woman, I think you can imagine where people might be, treat her a little differently, and so like this is her way of, I think, proving that to herself that she can handle it, and she's very headstrong. And that's why she finds out the location of the house. She immediately hops on a plane and flies cross country and says, "I'm going to get to the bottom of this." So.
Right. So when it comes to harking back to the gameplay,
Sure.
when it comes to this presence and finding, since the character is blind, how does the character actually combat this, or how does she make her way through this ghost story if she can't actually like physically fight back or even find spaces easily, since the player has to make sound in order to see.
Yep.
And his presence is attracted to sound. How exactly does she combat being able to do all this?
Absolutely. So Cassie's very strong. She's very confident, but she is vulnerable to the presence. And like even if you did have machine guns or something like that, like a BioShock game, it wouldn't do much good against the presence. So all you really can do is run and hide, essentially. And so you need to very carefully weigh how much noise you're creating so as to not alert the presence. But when the house starts to shake and growl and get angry at you, and you know that the presence is nearby, you find a bed to hide under, or just kind of like tuck away in a corner. So yeah, it is very much a cat and mouse game in that regard. It was very inspired by games like Amnesia and Alien Isolation. I love the vulnerability of being, hopelessly overpowered, and knowing that there's nothing you can do to stop this thing in the space. All you can do is avoid it. And so you have to weigh very carefully how much noise you're gonna make and how much risk you're gonna take. But yeah, we toyed around with some ideas, and we felt that ultimately, as we tested it out and put it in front of people, the people really responded to feeling like there's no way to stop this thing. All you can do is avoid it. So.
Okay. All right. So, how will the player be able to know if they're making too much noise, since the world is always changing?
Sure.
Of course, you'll have to use your echolocation to map out the newer area.
Yes.
So, how will the player be able to know that I'm making too much noise, and how would they be able to calculate how much they can make versus how much they should make?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and actually that was been one of the bigger challenges of the development is knowing how much information we're giving to the player, both when you're using sound, like how much of the world is revealed, but then also how much we're feeding back in terms of how angry the house is with you. The house is very much a character, right? And so initially, before our remaster, before the update we're about to release, I liked to make it so that it was a little bit more like open and unclear, because horror, like I was saying before, information is the enemy of horror. I felt like I went a little bit, in retrospect, a little bit too far in that regard. So now what we have is we tweaked it such that the house, it's a lot more sort of vocal, if you will. It will, like I said, it will growl, and the actual color that Cassie perceives the space will shift. So you'll go from a blue, when things are in a safe state, it's bluish hues, right? And as the house starts to get angrier and the presence starts to get closer to coming out, it'll go from yellows to oranges, and then when the presence is near, it like the whole world turns red, and you hear the house growling and that sort of thing. So I decided in the update to make it a lot clearer for the sake of so people can know when they can explore more openly. But that was a tricky balancing act, and I'm really happy with the way, especially with the feedback we get now, the way we've balanced that so far. So.
So you brought up the update multiple times since it's coming to the Switch now, and the Switch would be, I guess you could say, the definitive edition, and the PS4, PC, and Xbox One version, it would be updated to meet the same edition. What are some of the changes for those who already have the game? And who are expecting the update?
Sure.
What big changes are coming from the release version, the post-release version, and the new update?
So we've been working very hard on it. A lot of updates. I think the two biggest, most obvious ones are from the main menu. You'll notice when you start a new game, you get to choose between two additional modes. One of which allows you to play, we call it story mode. So it allows you to play the game essentially as a walking sim. So you don't have to worry about the presence in this mode. I was surprised at how watching streamers play and playing at events like this. A lot of people come like, I really love the world and I love the story, but I don't want to feel threatened. I don't want to feel under pressure. And I get that, but that was eye-opening to me. And so we added a mode that will essentially make it so that the house doesn't listen to you and you can explore. It still has the same tension and mood and atmosphere, but you don't have to worry about being chased. So we added that mode, and then we added on the opposite end of that spectrum, we added a scary mode where the presence is more aggressive. And if it catches you, it'll send you back to the main menu, and you'll have to replay a little. It's not permadeath, but you will lose a little bit more time. So a little bit more intensity there. We added that, and then on top of that, we also got really good feedback about story and what wasn't clear. It's a very story-driven game, and so we actually re-recorded our lead actress for a number of different lines to make things clearer. Lots of new sounds. We streamlined a couple of chapters, like particularly chapter 2. It's a complex chapter. It's really about this World War II war bride, and she just wants to get overseas to help her husband. She's really pro-military and really gung-ho and really hands-on, but she can't get overseas to say, like, she's basically being told no in a very similar way that Cassie's being told no. And so there were some bits that were really unclear there, and we really tried to streamline. And a lot of tweaks, a lot of updates. And again, it's all from the great feedback we get. It's an exciting time for me. I look at how possible it is now to continue to work on your game and to continue to improve and to take feedback. I value feedback very, 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 very highly. For a long time, I ran the user experience department at Irrational. And so we would have people come into the studio and play the game and give their feedback, and then we would iterate the game on that. But now you can continue to update your project, pretty much forever. Right. And I've always felt that games are never finished; they're more or less abandoned, which is sad because I would love to keep working on this and adding modes and that sort of thing. But anyway, so lots of new stuff, too many things to list, but primarily. Lots of tweaks, updates, and a couple new modes. Long-winded answer, huh?
No, that's what we want. The more detailed developers can go into their games, it shows a great passion,
yes. And
really it does answer more stuff that gamers wants to know. Because like somebody who has the PS4 PC version, they would like to know, okay, I got extra modes.
Yep.
So it gives them a chance to go back and visit. So when it comes to something like that, when you add in more stuff, and when you update your games, and you get the new feedback, are you afraid that people who enjoyed the original game, they might feel that something might be broken or that something was added in they don't like?
Sure.
How do you handle something like that? How do you expect for that kind of feedback to affect the game going into the future?
That's a great question. And that is a very tricky balancing act. And I want to be very careful there because, you're absolutely right. Like, you built up a fan base, people love your game, and you don't want to upset that, right? So I'm always a big fan of providing options, and that's primarily why the new modes are there. And I think that you have to be very careful about how you interpret the feedback, but then also how you act on it. And I think that the balancing act there is about understanding exactly what the issue is and then trying to find the way that's going to address it and being aware of what resonates really strongly with people, and you don't upset that. And so really what it comes down to is when you watch the streams, you listen to people at feedback, you sort of make these giant lists of the issues that people have, what's really good. I like to do it like top 3 things that people like and top 3 things that people dislike. So when I talk to people, it's like, oh, what's working, what's not, and I ask, again, the top 3, that kind of thing. And so you sort through it and you compile all the data and you try and rank the feedback very carefully as to what seems like the most prevalent and most important. And I think it just really comes from an awareness of where things are and what's working, and just being receptive to that feedback. But it's never going to be perfect. You're definitely going to make mistakes, and sometimes, you're probably going to upset some people. But I think ultimately you have to make sure that you're holding true to the vision that you have. And as long as the changes you're making hold true to that vision, and are adding what you perceive to be value in addressing issues, I think it has a way of working itself out. As long as you have to be very careful about how you're listening to that feedback. So it's just a tricky balancing act, and it's a mixture of voodoo. It's a little bit of alchemy, and I think it's just you just gotta really plug away at it and try and put as much of a system in place that you're not just winging it. I think that's where you get into trouble, is where it's just like, oh, I watched one stream and a person said that had this one comment or whatever, so stop everything. I'm gonna, you have to realize that there's a million different perspectives, and I think it's really about finding the most pressing issues and sort of ones that continue to resonate and not conflicting with what has been successful so far. If that makes any sense?
It does. Yes, it does.
Sorry.
All right, man, I appreciate it. And of course, you guys can pick up Perception right now on PS4, Xbox One, and PC. And when can we expect the game on the Switch?
We're in the final stages right now with Nintendo, so I hope anyway. So we're just crossing some final T's and dotting some I's and that sort of thing. So I want to get it out for Halloween, spooky game, of course. So very, very soon. Same thing with the updates, and it's an exciting time, and it's all from, the feedback and the reaction we've been getting. So good times.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time for this interview, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the expo.
You too.